Hi all, today I'm going to show you how to make a to-do list app in React Native using Firebase Authentication and the Firestore database to store to-dos. So I'm going to show you how to create the sign up page from scratch, as you can see here, with some password fields, and I'm going to show you how to use a keyboard avoiding view there. It looks a bit funny on screen at the moment just because I'm entering the text through the keyboard on my computer. If it was popping up an actual keyboard, then it would show you, it would move a bit better and not be so jumpy, but that's why it looks like that. I'll also show you how to verify emails and how to do various things with managing your user account. So logging out, updating password and deleting user and all the to-dos associated with the user. I'll also show you how to create a login page and log into an account, how to reset your password, and just anything you can see on screen at the moment is basically what I'm going to show you how to do. So I've got different ways you can navigate around because you never know how the user's going to react, and so all this code will be available on GitHub, but it's probably better if you're following along if you're making an app. It's good for newer developers to React Native, but there'll also be some more advanced topics too, obviously, with Firebase and Firestore. I'll show you how to create a modal so that you can add your to-do, and that will in turn call a function which will save that to the Firebase database. I'll show you how to delete from the Firestore database and how to edit items in the Firestore database. So you're going to learn a lot of different things about Firestore, and you're also going to learn a lot of different things about Firebase Authentication and just sort of creating an overall UI and sort of some practices I follow, what sort of structure I would have for my React Native apps. So you can see that I can delete them and it'll delete off the screen. And I can also tick them. Oh yeah, I can drag down to refresh and I can tick them and it will update that in the Firestore database. So when I refresh, it's still ticked. And then once again, I've got all the managing of accounts. So I'm going to be creating my app with Expo, so if you haven't installed that, please go ahead and install that, and I'll basically run the Expo init command and give my app name, and then I'll choose the blank template, so that's what I'm going to use to run my app. Once that's installed, I'll run start Expo, and I'll open my app on my simulator, and then from there I can go edit, and anything that I do will show up on screen, so it's quite good because you can sort of see exactly what changes you've made as you make them. I'm going to create a styles folder and put all my styles for the app in one place. The reason I'm doing that is just so that it's easy to get sort of a consistent style throughout my application. And I don't need to repeat stuff everywhere, and if I make a change I don't need to go and change it everywhere. You might have some specific styles in certain screens of your app, but overall I find that it's good to have a sort of central place for sort of common things that you might reuse, like a row container or like a vertical container that fills the whole space and centers the contents, text input styling, different text styles, so like header styles, body style, all that sort of thing. I find it useful to have in the app styles because I'm going to refer to it again and again. So yeah, that's what I'm showing you now, that you can just extract that into a new file that you can then refer to throughout all your different screens, because you're going to have a lot of different screens. I mean, you could write it all in one file, but that's going to be pretty hard to read. This sort of gives you some good readability. So that's a little bit on Flex CSS, which is what is used, and there are some good resources if you want to look at Flex CSS, and I'll link them in the description. Now I'm going to show you a bit about using Pixels. So Pixels is a really good place to come and find some background images. So if you have an image background that you want to use, it's a good place to come. You can set the orientation to vertical and you'll get nice phone-sized images. You can choose what size you want, and it gives you a message to say thanks to this person. You can donate to them. Basically, it's nice to give credit to these people because they're helping you get some free quality images for your phone. And it's also good to do a reverse image search on the image just to make sure it's actually not copyrighted by anyone and that someone random hasn't uploaded it to the website, because that could happen. And you don't want to get in trouble with copyrights. So here I am, I'm just going to add an image background. And it's going to take up the whole screen, and I'm just going to add my source, which will be that background image I've just added. And you can actually do some preloading of assets so it doesn't show a flash of white before the image loads, and it will load while the splash screen is loading. If you want to do that, then you can look at one of my other videos, which is on preloading and caching images. So I'm going to require that image that I've added. And then I'm going to set that as the source for this image background component. Whoops, I've called that background, not image. Cool. You can see that works, but it's kind of got this weird margin around it. So I'll just change to padding so it goes all the way to the edge of the screen and looks a bit better. You can see the text is kind of hard to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add another view to wrap that text and make it more visible. I find this is a good way if you are wanting to include image backgrounds. You do want your user interface to be quite usable. So it's good to wrap your text and put on some background color that's going to make your text stand out, just so that it's better user experience. And you can add some opacity so that the image still shows through a bit, and it'll sort of tie things together a bit nicely. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just creating a little container for the text, and it will eventually also have some inputs as well. So now I need to give that style that I've created to the view. If I call it background cover, you can sort of see, there you go. I don't like how it's not going all the way to the edge of the screen, so I'm going to remove this padding here. I can add that into the background. And I'm going to create a light text because you can't see my text anymore because I've got black. I'm just going to make that white, and I'm going to assign that to my text component. Awesome, so you can now see that text quite clearly, and now I'm going to want to go and add a new style. This is going to be my header style, and basically why I want to add that is because I want to be able to show on each page what the page is, just because I don't want to include the navigation headers. I don't really like the look of them that much. So yeah, I'm going to just create my own header. It's going to be pretty simple. It's going to be that size, and I'm just going to call it login on this page, just so it's quite clear what this page is for. So yep, you can see that's been added. So next up, I'm just adding some opacity to my background, just so you can sort of see through to the image behind, and it looks a little bit nicer. You can sort of see that it's not quite a solid black anymore there. And I'm going to want to add some text input components to give the user the ability to enter their username and password so that they can log in. So I'm going to create a text input style here, and this is going to be what I'm going to use when it's on a dark background, because I will have some text inputs on a light background later. I'm wanting to align itself to stretch so that it takes up the entire width. That will basically stop it growing as the input grows. I'm giving it a placeholder which sort of prompts the user for what might be input into that space, and I'm also giving it a placeholder text color which will allow the user to be able to sort of see the text color and see the actual placeholder text, and from there be able to input what it's asking for. Just sort of changing that color until I'm happier with it. Just making it a bit more grayed out so it doesn't look like the normal text input text. I'm happy with that, and so I'm going to add my password one as well. So I'm wanting to apply my style now, so I'm going to give that the text input and light text. So you can apply multiple styles by passing in an array of styles. I want to apply that to both of my different text inputs. And I'm also going to want a border bottom color for this, just so that it indicates to the user where they can sort of click. And a border bottom width would be, I think 2 pixels is probably good. So if I just apply that that border style here, like text input, yeah, you can sort of see they've got a nice little line under there. It sort of indicates where it is a bit better. I just want to add some margin to space those out a bit better so it's easier to click on them. And then I'm going to import React, and the reason I want to import React is I want to make use of some React hooks specifically for state. So I want the username and password to be able to be updated when the user types into the text inputs, and for that we need state. So I'll do react.useState, and the value that I pass in there is actually the default value, and then I've got some setter methods. So you provide, I'm going to make my my password input a secure text entry, and that's because obviously you don't want people to be able to see the password that's being entered on screen. In case someone's like looking over their shoulder, it's sensitive information. So to do that, you go secure text entry equals true, and that will just make it obscured. I'm just going to place this over multiple lines so I find it easier to read, and I'm going to give the value which will be equal to the username, and then when the username changes, the user enters text, then I'm going to want to call set username with that value. So that's what I can pass to on change text. I'll do the same for the password input. The value will be password, and on change text will be set password. Now users can type on into that box. You can see the password is a secure text entry. The keyboard's not showing on screen just because I'm entering from my laptop keyboard. But if you're wanting to do proper testing, you should actually be testing with the on-screen keyboard, because you'll see how things react to the keyboard showing up. And you'll probably want a keyboard avoiding view, and I'll show you that a bit later. So now I'm just wanting to add some extra prompts, because maybe a user doesn't have an account, in which case they're going to need to create one. And if they don't have an account, what I'm going to want to do is show a button so that they can go to the sign up page. So it looks a little bit funny. I think I might just make this a inline sort of button. So what I want to do there is I want to make it the same size as the text. So I'm going to create a new folder. Where I'm going to have my components. So this is just any components I want to put inside the app. It just sort of separates them out into a nice place where I can find any of my components that might be reused a few times. So what I'm going to call this is just an inline text button, and it's going to make use of the pressable component, and it's also going to just sort of look like text inline, but it's going to be a different color to indicate that maybe you can click on it. So I'm going to import text and pressable from React Native, and I'm just creating a component here, so it's just going to be called inline text button, and then I'll return what it will look like. So I'm going to want to pass some props in, and that's because I want to be able to, when the button's pressed, navigate to a different page. So I want to be able to pass in an onPress function so that it will call the onPress function when I press on the button. I'm also going to want to include some text, which is basically what's going to get shown as the button text. And I want to also give that some styling. So the styling is going to depend on whether it's pressed or not. So what I can do is I can use this pressed function here. And depending on whether it's pressed or not, I can actually apply sort of like different styling, and so that will make it look like it's been pressed. So I can increase the opacity just to make it look like, oh, okay, there's been user input. Otherwise, if you don't do any sort of change on press, then it kind of looks to the user like nothing's really happening. And so it can be a bit confusing to them. So I'm just going to choose some inline text button color. And then what we're going to want to do is add another style for when the inline text button is pressed, and basically that's going to be the exact same in terms of it's going to have the same color, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of opacity to it so it sort of indicates that it's been clicked, but it sort of doesn't look too extreme. So if it's pressed, I'll just apply the pressed inline text button style, and if not, I'll apply the inline text button style. And just separating these onto different lines so it's a little bit more clear to read once again. So now I'm going to import my inline text button and use it inside my text component. The reason I'm doing that is I just want it to show alongside rather than in a new line. I'm going to pass in the text I want, which is sign up. And I don't really have any on press at the moment because I don't have anything I want to be able to do. And you can see it's showing up there. But I'm not really a fan of that colour. It's a bit too muted. I think I want it to stand out a bit more. I can use this Coolers website to get some ideas on different colours. It's quite good also if you want to sort of get some colour palettes. You can sort of press spacebar through until you are happy with the colour that comes up. And so yeah, you can sort of see some different colours that I'm getting from this. It's a little bit bluer. I don't know if I'm quite happy with it still. So now I'm just adding a row container. Basically what that is going to do is it's just going to allow me to place multiple items on the same line. I'm going to give them a vertical margin, and I'm going to use that here. It's just because I don't like how close it is to the items above, and that's why I want to use a row container, just to add some vertical padding here. And I can also put this on a separate line and it'll look a bit nicer, a little bit less nested, more tidy. I don't tend to like to put components inside my text components. Cool, so you can see that it's taking up the row. I wanted a little space there just so that you can sort of have a bit of separation between the button and the and the text that says don't have an account. So I'm also going to want a button that is actually for logging in, and I'm going to make this a main button purely because this is a main action that I want to perform on the screen. And you can actually provide different colours because that blue, once again, isn't really showing up as much as I'd like it to. So to do that, what you do is you actually, instead of a style, you can actually supply a property, and I think that's because it renders differently on Android and iOS. So yeah, if you hit spacebar a few times, it'll give you different color options on this Coolers site. I often use it for inspiration for color palettes. And you just sort of click through until you've got a color palette you like. I'm just using it for individual colors just to get a randomized colors and seeing what's out there. But yeah, you can actually use it to build the main color palettes for your app, and it can be quite handy. I do find with my own apps, if I'm making more than one app, I do like to use the same colours just to sort of have similar branding across my whole sort of set of apps, and just I think it will help with if I were to get bigger as an app developer, which I don't think I will at any point in the future because I have been focusing more on my YouTube channel, then I think it would be useful to have similar branding just so that people know. So you can see that that's like light orange. I don't think that's bright enough. I'll try this canary colour, maybe. That's still not really what I'm looking for. So yeah, having sort of consistent colours across all your apps can be really helpful if you do grow, because then people are going to recognise that you're a reputable app developer, and it'll probably help drive some more app downloads rather than if you just had really randomised colours. I think what will help here is just increasing that opacity just so that I can get a little bit more contrast with the colours. And so yeah, I think that's something that I've done which has improved that. You just sort of got to fiddle with it till you're happy with it. UI can be a bit fiddly. I also want a password reset option. So if the user's forgotten their password, I want them to be able to reset. I'm not quite happy with the spacing between those two, the vertical spacing between those two row containers, so I'm just going to decrease that down a bit. I kind of like how it's spaced between the button and the text input, but just not between each other. So yeah, what I can do here is I can just actually create a new style and give a margin top and a margin bottom, and then just apply different ones to the different row containers depending on whether I want the spacing bigger at the top or the bottom. And then I can, so what's wrong there? Oh yeah, it's supposed to be margin bottom, not bottom margin for the actual style. These are pretty much just like the CSS styles, and then I need to go ahead and apply them to the actual components. So I'm going to give a default for 8 so that it's got 8 separating them, and then I want them to have 16 either side between the input and the button. And that's just because together those 8 margins add up to 16. But yeah, there's not that sort of padding that I want between the other components. And it's just to make it easy for the user to differentiate different components. It'll make it easier to click as well. Cool, so that's looking a bit better to me. Now I want to toggle on that keyboard, and you can see it's mostly covering that login button. And so it would be hard to press the login button. I could do it, but it's not a very good user experience. And to get around that, you can actually use a keyboard avoiding view. So what you can do is you can import that from React Native. It's supplied by React Native, and you want to import platform as well, because Android and iOS actually behave differently. So I'll load up the Android emulator in a minute to show you how that differs. So basically, I'm going to give different behavior depending on whether it's iOS or Android, and you can fiddle with these options and just sort of see what works best for your app. It might vary a bit, but typically for iOS you find padding will work quite well, and for Android either default or height will work well. So you can see that looks a little bit better, but it's still not quite there. It might be because I've got I'm not exactly sure why actually, but sometimes you can change your vertical offset and that can help a bit. I want to see what it looks like on an Android as well before making any changes. I was wondering if maybe the padding was causing issues, but it doesn't seem to make a huge difference, so add that back in. So now I'm opening it on Android, and I've added in that padding back, and we'll see what it looks like when it loads on up. So that's what the UI looks like, slightly different, and you can see it sort of pops off the screen with the height one. I'm not exactly sure why that's happening, so I'm just going to have a bit of a fiddle. Like I said, at different UIs, different options tend to work better for them. So if I just go straight to padding, I'll just see what that looks like for Android. And that works a bit better, but it looks a bit funny because it's stretching out that component. I don't really want it looking like that. I'm not quite happy with that. You can notice my text is smaller on the Android, and the reason for that is I've actually set my simulator for iOS to have a bigger text size just because I prefer that. So I'm going to try null, so no just default behavior for Android, and see how that goes. And that's actually looking a lot better, so I might stick with that. That's exactly what I want it to look like, sort of centered and just containing the components. So I'm happy with that. and try just adding a keyboard vertical offset to see if that helps with the iOS version. So it didn't seem to make much of a difference. I'll try a different value and see if that makes a difference. Okay, that's looking a lot better, but I think that value is probably a bit large, so I'll try like 80. See what happens when I reload it. It's looking quite good. I think even smaller would be better. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. 60 keyboard vertical offset seems to be working well, but let's just double check that hasn't broken Android. Yeah, you can see it looks pretty much the same on Android as before, so that's quite good. We're happy with that. And so, yeah, you can just sort of fiddle around until you find the right sort of settings for your app. You don't want it to be hard for the users to click on things. So now I'm going to separate out my code out of app.js into a login screen. And the reason for that is I'm about to add some navigation to different screens. So I'm going to create the sign up screen and the reset password screen, and also the to-do screen and the manage account screen a bit later on. So I'm just going to change this to login because that's what my new screen is. So what I'm going to use is actually the stack navigator for React Native. It's pretty standard navigator and it's very easy to use. I've got another tutorial on it which goes a lot more into detail on it if you want to do more complex things, like passing data. But for my purposes, I don't really need a lot. I will show you passing data, but really all I need is pop and navigate. Just going to comment that up there in case I want to add it back a bit later on. But yeah, I'm going to want to put this login component here for now, just so you can sort of see that I've moved things across correctly. I've actually missed a few things because I've moved into a different folder. So that's looking a lot better. Now I'm going to stop my app because I want to install the React navigation stuff. So just adding these packages using Yarn and Expo install. And once that's gone ahead, I'll go and start and open on iOS again. Okay, I haven't updated my background image, and it must have just been working because it must have been cached of some variety earlier. Okay, cool. And did you see that white flash on screen as the image loaded? That's the sort of thing you can avoid with preloading and caching. Like I said, there's another tutorial on that on my channel, so I'll link in the description below. So first off, you're going to want to import, create native stack navigator. That's going to be used for your navigation. So it's quite an important thing to import. And you also want the navigation container. Inside that, you're going to be able to specify your different screens. For the different screens, you can specify a name, which will be how you navigate to it. So you'll pass that name when you want to navigate to the screen. So I'll make one of mine login, and the component I want for login is obviously the login screen component. And I'll just give some options, which is basically that I don't want any header, so I'll just do header none. That's why I've created my own login sort of header at the top of that black view. It's just so that I can sort of keep it as I want it. I prefer to have control over the UI a bit more. But yeah, if you want, you can use these. Use the header to show what screen you're on. You can also add sort of header buttons and stuff like that. But yeah, you can look into React navigation documentation a bit more for that. So now I'm also going to want a sign up screen. It's going to look much like my login screen, except I'm going to have a confirm password box as well, because the user's going to have to sign up and you don't want them entering the wrong password in just one box. So that's why it's good to have a second box to confirm password, just for usability. I'm also going to have a validation message. So like if the user's already signed up, it will tell them that the account's already in use, stuff like that. It'll just display any Firebase error messages that pop up. So now if they've already got an account, I want them to log in. So I've got that option available to them. And I'm just going to want to change that to email, because Firebase Authentication is using email. So I need them to be able to specify their email. And then I'm just adding my confirm password text input. And the main action that I want them to be able to do is to sign up. And I'll once again give that header of sign up. So now they've created that UI, I think that's pretty much done. Oh yeah, and I'll have a text input to just show validation message. So it'll be anything from Firebase, or if the passwords don't match. So now I'm going to want to add another stack screen, that's so I can navigate to my sign up screen, and I'll just give it a name sign up, which is what I'll use to route to it. And I'm just giving it the sign up component. That's the component that should be shown when we go to that route. So now if we go to login and pass in navigation, then we can navigate to our sign up screen when the sign up button is pressed. So if I go down, sign up, and just add an on press. And go navigation.navigate. And pass and sign up as the route, then it'll take me to the sign up page. So how the stack navigator works is it's like a stack, so it pushes things on, and then you can pop to go back to the previous screen, or you can continually add to the stack. So yeah, it's ideal to pop back to things if you're wanting to go back. If you had the header, it would have a back option, but I haven't got the header. I've chosen not to include that for any of my screens today. So if I want to go back to login, I can. I just add a navigation.pop there on the login button press. So yeah, if I go back to sign up, if I and I also want to change my login screen to email, because once again I'm logging in with email and password, not a username, and that's just because I've got I'm using the Firebase authentication. That's how it's going to work. If I wanted to, I could set up username stuff, but it'd be a little bit more effort. So I find email is actually better anyway, because most people can remember their email, but often you get different usernames for different sites. So it can be a little bit more confusing for the user if they have to remember that additional information. So yeah, I prefer email sign up anyway, so it's not a big deal to me. So I'm going to have this validation. So whenever the passwords are updated, I want to validate them so that I can add a validation message if they don't match. And even if they don't match, I will set the value just to update the text input, but I want the validation message to show so that the user knows the passwords don't match. If the passwords do match, I want to make sure that I've cleared that validation message. Cool, so I'll set that value, and that should update text inputs. So if I update this, I'll want to call that validate and set, and I'll pass in the value that is the new value, the value to compare with, and what function to call to actually set the value. And once again, I'll do the same thing for the confirm password, except instead I'll be comparing with password and calling set confirm password. Cool. So you can see once again my keyboard avoiding view is actually working quite well. When I don't have it and use the keyboard input from my laptop, you can see it sort of does this weird shifty thing. That wouldn't happen on a actual phone because I wouldn't be able to use this keyboard input, so it's fine. And I'm just going to provide some style to this validation message so that it actually is visible. So I'll just go and add that to this file. I'm just going to make it red because it's an error message and it'll draw the user's attention. Typically, if you see a bit of red text on screen, you're going to read it and see what's wrong. Cool, you can see passwords do not match if I enter one, but then when I do match them, the message clears. Okay, so now that I have a working sort of sign up page, obviously it doesn't actually sign up, I'll add the Firebase integration a bit later. What I'm going to want to do is I'm actually going to want to create my reset password page. I want it to be pretty similar once again to my login screen, but this one's only just going to have an email field. And then when the user enters the email, it'll email them a new link which they can use to reset their password. So yeah, I'm going to just copy that login page and just change a few things. That's the easiest way to get that going nice and quick. I could have extracted the image background and keyboard avoiding view into another component just to wrap it, but I think it's simple enough that I don't need to do that, especially seeing as I've already extracted my styles. If I did have to obviously copy my styles again and again and again, then I might consider extracting to a separate component, but I think for the simplicity of it, it's fine to just keep it. But I mean, it's always up to the developer what they think is best and more readable. So yeah, So I've created my reset password page and now I need to add it to my stack navigator. So the name will be reset password, component will be reset password, and I'll need to import that. And once again, I'm not showing the header just because I like control over that sort of thing. So from the login page, I can actually add navigation by adding an on press to my inline text button component. And what I'm going to do is just navigate to that reset password page. So I'll just go navigation.navigate and pass in the reset password route. Cool, you can see it's got an email, and if you don't have an account, it tells you can sign up. I could also have had a link back to the login page, but I've decided that's a bit unnecessary and overkill there. So now I'm going to show you how to set up Firebase. You're going to want to add a new project and enter its name. I'm just going to call mine ToDo app. So Firebase basically handles a lot of the authentication, and it also has some Firestore stuff, so you can have a back end without actually having to go along and set up any actual back end. You can also create some Google Cloud functions as well. And there is a free tier so that you don't need to actually pay anything if you're only using a small amount. So that's what the Spark plan is. And there's also the Blaze plan. So yeah, it costs nothing per month, and it's got some, you can see all the plan details to see what's actually available for free. But for certain things you'll need to pay, or if you go over a certain amount of usage, you'll need to pay. So I'm going to want to set up authentication. So I'll just click this Get Started button. And that's just so that users can have an account they sign into and see their own individual to-dos. So I'm going to use the email password sign-in provider. And I am going to enable that and save. It just gives you a little bit of info on what sort of quotas are available. And yeah, you can sort of check out what users have signed up here or add users manually. You can see any email templates for password reset or verification here. You can actually do an email address change, but I've chosen not to implement that. I don't really feel it's that necessary for my app, but you can add that too if you wanted to. You can also have emails coming from your own SMTP server. So if you wanted a custom email address, then you could do that, but I'm just going to use the inbuilt Firebase one. But yeah, you can change any of the templates to sort of suit more what you want. And if you go to the documentation, you can see a bit on how to actually incorporate Firebase authentication. So there's this authentication section, and you can click through and sort of find what's useful to you. I'm going to be using web because I'm using Expo React Native, and I'm using password authentication, so that's where I'm going to go. So I've done the first step, which is adding Firebase, and this will give you the code for how to do different things. So it specifies which web version for one thing. So it's saying web version 9, which is what I've installed, what I will install because it's the latest version. And you can go to the actual back to Firebase to get the actual project overview or settings, and that's where you can sort of see how to include it. Okay, yeah, so you can go to the project overview and click on that and register your app. So mine's just ToDo app. I don't need Firebase hosting because this is actually just a Expo React Native app, not a website. It tells you what package to install and gives you code for configuring it. So I'm not going to actually use the analytics. I'm just going to be using the initialize app, and then I'll use auth for this next part, and then I will also use DB later on for when I want to save my to-do items. So first off, I'll Expo install Firebase and then restart my simulator and open it in iOS. Then I'm just going to copy in this code and place it into my app.js. Note that I haven't actually really done this. I think I've done this once before, so I'll probably have to do a bit of refactoring along the way, but it's not a big deal. You can learn with me and sort of, I think it's kind of good. You'll sort of see some easy mistakes to make and be able to sort of see some common resolutions that I'm going to go through. So yeah, there are some benefits of me not having pre-coded this. I really am just coding as I would. So I'm getting this error, can't find variable IDB index. I did a bit of research, and it actually turns out that it's the specific Firebase version 9.6.8, I think. So what I'm going to want to do is install 9.6.7, which is the prior version, and that doesn't have this issue. I think they are working on a fix, so hopefully by the time you come to build your app with Firebase, it won't have that issue, but if you do encounter that issue, that could be why. I've seen other things saying that if you have analytics enabled for your app, that can sometimes happen. So yeah, if you're still getting that issue after downgrading your version to 9.6.7, then just check whether analytics is on and maybe try turning it off. So inside my sign up, I want to get off because I want to be able to call this create user. So this is a sign in one, this is a create user one. I'm just going to copy that line across. So create user with email and password. And when I click on sign up, I want that to be called. So I'm just going to create a function which will do that logic for me. So I only want to do this if the passwords match. Otherwise, I don't want to try and create it because it's going to not sort of be... the user might not know what password to use when they log in, so it might be a bit confusing. So yeah, only if the passwords match will I do this. And then I want to navigate to my to-do page, which I will create in a minute, but I haven't created yet. So I'll just remove that for now. So basically when the user is created, you can sort of handle that promise, and when it is created you'll get this user credential back with the user in it. You can use that to pass it to the to-do page, but I don't think you really need to because you can actually use auth.currentUser, but I'll show you it anyway, just because I want to show you passing values to different routes. If there's an error, I'm just going to set that validation message. And on sign up press, I obviously want to call my sign up function. So I'm just going to enter my email. I'm going to enter some passwords. I'll try sign up. Okay, you can see that I've got a Firebase error here because I don't have strong enough passwords. So if I enter a more secure password and click sign up. Okay, so it's not giving me any errors, so I think it's probably succeeded. It's just I'm not actually doing anything at the moment when it succeeds. So you can see if I click sign up again that it will give the error that the email password's already in use, so that you can see that it actually has worked and actually signed up the user and they exist somewhere in there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create my to-do page so that I can navigate to it when the user is created. So just creating a component once again. This is pretty basic. It's going to have navigation because I'm going to want to be able to navigate to the manage account page at some point, and also log out temporarily. So just giving that default container style, which I use in pretty much all of my root level view components. And what I'm wanting to do is I'm actually going to want to have a text component with that user JSON stringified, just so that you can sort of see that I can pass that data through using the navigation route parameters. I won't actually do that in the end because I'm going to use auth.currentUser, just because it's a bit more simple. But yeah, you could do that if you wanted to. So once that user's created, I'll navigate to to-do and I'll pass in that user credentials. And I'm going to create that screen inside my stack navigator so I can navigate to it using that to-do name. And I'll use that to-do component as well. And once again, my header is always going to just not be showing. You can actually set that at a higher level, but I just haven't. So you can look at the React navigation documentation to see how to do that. So inside my text, I'm just going to want to show that user credentials. So I'm going to need that route parameter passed into my to-do component, and then I'm just going to do a JSON.stringify on it. And that's just so that you can sort of see all the text on the screen. It's not going to look pretty. There's quite a lot of text, but you'll be able to see that's worked, I guess, at least. So I'm using a different email because I've already used hello@tripwiretech.com, so I'm using a different one. And when it signs in and creates a user, it will send me all the additional information like the user email and also any other profile information it has, along with any access tokens, which you can use to connect to the Google Cloud functions, and you can also use it to when you're connecting to the Firestore database. So now I'm going to want to add the actual sign-in ability so I can sign in to into my different accounts through the login page. So I'm going to import get auth and sign in with email and password into here. And if email is not equal to an empty string and if password's not equal to an empty string, then I'm going to try and log the user in. So I'll be able to use these this code here. On-off state change will be a bit useful later on because you'll be able to detect whether the user's logged in or not already, even if you're in a different app session. So yeah, once the user's signed in, then I can navigate to the to-do page and pass them along again if I still want to, which I will at this point, but I'll remove that a bit later. And then I'm going to want to add some validation messages to my login page, just so that I can sort of see what's going wrong if it fails to log in for whatever reason. So one will just be if they don't have the username and password, and other ones will be if the Firebase returns an error, and I'll just set it to be whatever that error message is. So on press, I'll want to call login, and I'm also going to want to add a text input, which is going to have my error message in it. So I'm just going to add that below my login header. I'm just going to give that the error text style, and it's just going to be that error message value. I'm just going to reload. Okay, so it's giving me no Firebase app has been created. And I think that is actually just because I'm calling this get auth twice. But I'll just double check. Okay, yeah, it's because I'm calling this get auth twice. I was just moving it into login to see if that would solve things. But I think what I'm going to have to do here is actually extract all the Firebase stuff into a separate file. And then just import it into my various screens. That's not a big deal though. So what I'm going to do is I want to initialize that app once, and I'm going to do it inside this firebase.js. I'm going to want to pull out this get auth call, because I'm going to want to just get the auth once here. So I'll just call get auth. And then I'm wanting to be able to export the authentication. So this is one of the mistakes I made, and that's basically I don't actually need on-auth state changed here. I only need it on my login page. What I'm doing here is I'm just trying to set the current user, but if because I'm exporting it doesn't really get updated, so I actually think that you're better off using it where you actually need it to trigger some change. So for example, on my auth screen, on my login screen, I need to be able to log in when the user is already logged in, if they've logged in a previous session, which Firebase keeps track of. But anyway, I can import from auth, and I can import the current user, and the current user is really not going to do anything, but I'll show you how to change that a bit later on. I don't need get auth anymore because I've already called that inside my firebase.js file and imported that. And I'm just here is what I would want to do, but I would want to do it with on-auth changed instead. Basically, I was just going to navigate to do if there was a current user, but that's just not going to really work. It's always going to be undefined. Just checking what this warning was, and it's just deprecation sort of thing. And I'm just adding my auth back in everywhere so that it will work. And now I'm going to want to go and remove this on-auth change just because I found it wasn't doing anything. I'll just use auth.currentUser. That's not going to actually work either, and I'll show you that in a second. It will work sometimes when the current user manages to load before the component loads, but sometimes it won't. Sometimes it will be triggered after that the current user will be set, and in that case it's not going to work. But anyway, now I'm going to go ahead and send a password reset email. So I'm just going to find the code for that on the Firebase documentation. So what I'm wanting to do this time is import send password reset email from Firebase auth and copy this code across. Once again, I'm going to want a error message available on the screen, because if the email doesn't exist, for example, it might have an error message. So I'll create one there and be able to display it to the user just to provide a better user experience. And I'll navigate back to login when the password reset email has been sent, because I think that they're going to probably go to the email, reset their password, and then going to be using that login page. So here's just my error message, so that the user can sort of see what's gone wrong if there's an issue, and they can do anything they need to do to resolve it. And I'll want to call that reset password from that reset password button. So go ahead and add an on press to that button. And I'll just call reset password. It's pretty simple to implement reset password. Actually, it's quite simple to implement a lot of Firebase things, and I think that's why a lot of people use it. It's really sort of friendly if you're not familiar with back-end code at all. I'm also wanting to send an email verification when the user creates their account, and that's just because I want to make sure that they're verified and not using like an incorrect email. So I'll let them log in with the unverified email, but if their email is unverified, I won't let them add any to-do list items, is the ideal sort of workflow here. So I'll send them an email verification when they create an account, and then I'll still navigate to that to-do page. I'm going to want a button so that I can log out of my to-do page, because I want to be able to go back to obviously sign in, because it's good to provide that option for users. I'm also going to want to show a different I'm also going to want to show like that send verification email option. I want to check whether the user's verified, and I want to show them an option to send a new verification email in case either the one that's been sent is expired, or perhaps they've lost it or never received it for whatever reason. So these are just all the different options available to you, and I'm trying to find the I'm trying to find the sign out there, that's right, because I want to be able to log out of the app. So I'll create a function called sign out, and I'll basically just call that authentication sign out. It's pretty easy to call, and when it's successful, I'll just pop to the top, which will basically take me back to my login page, as that's my root sort of component. Not expecting any errors there, so I think I'll just leave it as is for that. So yeah, I've got this log out button that will log the user out. And here's my password reset. So if I enter in an email address that it does not exist, it will fail. Say invalid email. If I enter one that does exist and click reset password, it should send me a reset password email. So if I open up my Gmail and refresh that, you can see a reset password email, and this is the what it is, and it'll send you to a page where you can enter a new password. So I've done that. I'll save, and I can sign in with my new password if I want to. I can also create a new account, and it'll send me a verification email. I forgot to import that send email verification, so if I do that, I'll probably have to do a new username because it's would have created. And so yeah, signing up. I think I forgot to save it. So yeah, signing up, it'll go and log me in. If I go back and try for my new email that I tried, you can see a verification email, and when I click on that, it'll verify my account. So this new free at tripwiretech.com is verified. None of my other ones are verified because I haven't gone and clicked on those verification ones yet. So if I log in, it works currently, but I want to be able to show whether the email is verified or not. And also give the user an option to send an email verification if it isn't, because I'm not going to let them add to-dos unless they have a verified account. So what I can do is I can use auth.currentuser.emailverified, and if it's verified, I'll show content, and if not, I'll show the send verification email content. So I'll create two functions for those. Show content's just going to show my whole to-do list and give the user the option of adding to-do items, and then I've got my send verification email, which will allow me to verify my account. So I'm just going to prompt the user to verify their account, and then provide an option to actually verify it. Send the new verification email. And it's pretty simple, so I'm just going to provide that function in line because it's just a one-liner and not very long. So that that user is actually verified. And I forgot to provide those as functions. I was just providing the actual variable. So here we go. We're going to log into an unverified account, and it'll should show me. Maybe I verified that account earlier. I'll try a different one that I definitely haven't verified. Okay, so I can't find variable text, so obviously it's trying to display that. So yes, if it's unverified, it will show please verify your email and give you the option to send a new verification email. I'm just going to do some styling here just to adjust what it looks like. And that's just because the default container I was using, I didn't have any margin on it. I kind of want to have a margin just to make it look a bit prettier. So I'm just going to change that to image container because that's what I'm using for my image background. And then I'm just going to create a new container, which is basically the same, except I want to have some margin on this one. Awesome, yeah. Cool, so it looks a little bit better. You can sort of see that it's not quite all the way to the edges, which it was previously. The background color's a bit ugly. I don't know if you noticed that, but it's not a big deal. I think I can fix that by providing some padding or just removing that background color on that component. I'd say probably removing the background colors. Okay. Cool, so that looks better. It's got the no weird border around the edge of it. I'm just changing the color of that logout button to sort of align better with the rest of the app. But I mean, I'm probably not going to focus too much on perfecting all my styling here because I would rather show you other things, and I think you can sort of see enough styling from what I've done throughout this. I'm going to add a header once again so that to sort of introduce my app, and I'm going to want to add a view which is going to have my inline button. I wanted it to be a view because I want it to sort of be right aligned rather than center aligned, and that's just because I want it to be I want it to have a manage account button. I kind of want it to be appearing where I think an action would appear. And I'm not going to use a main button for this because I think it should look a little bit less intrusive. So yeah, I'm just going to do manage account. It's a little bit hard to read, so I think I'm going to need to make some changes to allow for styling of that color. So I'll do that in a second. It's going to allow for themes like different colours, light and dark, but I think it's actually more flexible to allow the user to pass in colour, and so that might actually be more beneficial in this case. So I'm going to use a property for colour, and I'm going to set this new style if there's a colour property against the inline component, otherwise I won't, and they'll basically allow it to override the default colour. Just going back to my colours website that I like so much, just to generate a few different color options. There are other ways you can actually generate color palettes. So if you've got an image, you can actually use that image to generate similar colors. There are also like monochrome color generators. If you type in color palette selection into Google, you'll probably find a few different options, and you can find one that works for you. I just find that the coolers thing lets me sort of see how a few different colors might work together. So I'm just going to add that style at the end just so it overrides the existing style for colour if there's a colour value present. So yeah, that's what I've done there by providing the colour property. And I think that colour looks okay inside my thing. So I'm going to want to right align that as well. So I'm just going to do some styling to allow that to be right aligned. I've never been the best at CSS, so it does sometimes take me some fiddling to get it right. I'm sure that a lot of people are probably the same, but I know a lot of people who use React Native are web developers, so they're probably a lot better at it than me. There you go. So you can see that justify content flex end is moved my manage account button to the end, and by supplying that align self stretch on the row container, it's allowed my row to take up the entire screen, and that's width of the screen, and that's why it's now able to be on that right hand side, and I think that looks a bit better. So now I'm going to work on my show content, which is basically just going to be a view, and inside this view I want it to have I'm just going to change this to a safe area view, by the way, for iOS. That's just so that it doesn't go into that top area with the battery symbol and all that. It sort of has margins predefined that sort of control that and allow you to avoid having issues there. But yeah, I'm wanting to add another view which has my list in it, and also my option to add a new to-do when the user is verified. Not 100% happy with the styling, so I'm just sort of playing around with that a bit. I'm just going to add a horizontal margin to my row container so that manage account isn't right up against the side. And I'm a bit happier with that now. I'm just going to specify that as a new style just so that it's a bit more controllable for different for different views, so that not everything needs to have that right margin, because not all of the row containers should. It's really just some of the right aligned ones, but even not necessarily all the right aligned ones will need it, depending on what they're nested inside. I guess that's one difficulty of reusing the same sort of styles throughout your application, is that if you do change one, you need to be careful that it's not having a negative impact elsewhere in your application. So you kind of need to go through at the end and make sure everything's working out well. So I'm going to add a add to do button in here. And what this add to do button is going to do is it's basically going to it's going to, I'm just going to change this color too, so make it pop out a bit more. It's going to open a modal, which will then allow us to enter text, which will be our to-do item. And then that will, in turn, once that has been approved, it will go and add to Firebase. So I'm just going to add my modal now. So this is just my modal layout. It's going to be pretty simple. It's just really going to be a text input and a couple of buttons, because all I really need is a text input at this stage. We know that if you're adding a to-do item, you wouldn't typically expect it to already be done, because what would be the point other than, I guess, making yourself feel a bit better that you've achieved something. But I mean, if you've already achieved something, I wouldn't bother adding it to a to-do list. So by default, I'm just going to have everything incomplete to start. And so I don't actually need to include a field for that in my modal. And also I will want that user linked, but I don't need that as a field because that's just going to come from the current authenticated user. So this is going to be the view, like what content is contained inside my modal. I find it's easier to actually just have the modal inside the actual view, because then you can sort of set the visibility a bit more easily. And I feel like the code sort of looks a bit more clear, so that's why I've chosen not to have the modal inside here. It just sort of would overcomplicate things a bit, but I will have my UI inside here. So I'm going to want to have another header, which is basically that this is adding to-dos. And I'm going to want to have a text input as well. So I'm going to want it to be much like one of these text inputs, but instead of a light text input, I want it to be sort of a darker text input, because it's on a white background this time as opposed to a dark background. I'm going to need to provide, once again, I'm going to need to use React state so that I can set the value of my text input and use the value that the user types in, more importantly. So I'm going to create a new app style for dark text input and also have a new I don't need to set a dark text style, because I'm just going to use the default, which is like black. So that's why I'm not adding in a new dark text style. But yeah, we'll need a dark text input style, which will have a black bottom border instead of a white one. And then I'm going to want some buttons which will allow me to either close the text input or to close the modal or to add the to-do item. So I'm going to create a new row container view. I'm going to add some buttons to that. Also going to want this right aligned, so I'm just adding this right alignment, and I'm wanting a right margin as well. So I'm going to give that a title, and I'm just going to call that one cancel. I'm going to have another one which is okay. So cancel is just going to close the dialog without adding. So I'll just call the on cancel on close property that will be passed to this component. And I'm going to have the OK button, which will which is basically going to call the property add to do and pass the to do value from the text input, and then clear the text input so that it's not got values in it, and then just close the text, close the modal so that we go back to the to do screen. So now I can go and add that modal into my todo.js file. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have a React state for your modal, and that's going to represent whether the modal is visible or not. So I'm going to need to import React from React state so I can use the use state hook. And I'm going to create this new variable modal visible and set modal visible, which will allow me to control whether my adding to do modal is visible or not. And I'm going to want to import my add to do modal so I can actually show it. I want my modal to appear with the animation type of slide, but you can change it to different values. I just set it to transparent true, and visibility will be dependent on whether modal visible is true or not. On request close is when Android back button is pressed, and for that you'll want to set the modal visible to false because you're wanting to go back to the to-do screen. That's not necessary for iOS, obviously, because there's no back button. And then you're going to display your add to do modal. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pass in your on close and on add to do functions. So on close is pretty simple. It's just setting that modal visible to false. And on add to do, we'll just have to add a new function for that. So just checking what that's called, add to do. Basically, because that's taking in a to-do item, I need to be able to take that in, and I'm just going to log it at this stage because I don't have Firebase database set up at this stage, but I will be adding that very shortly for you guys. So on press of add to do, I want to set that modal visible to true so that I can enter in my my new to-do item. Oh, whoops, I forgot to add that modal, import it from that React Native package, so I've done that now. I'll just shake and reload. So you can see how it hasn't logged us in, and that's because it's using auth.currentUser, but when I entered a value into the checkbox, it did actually log me, into the text box, it did log me in, and that's because it re-rendered because the state changed, and by that point auth.currentUser was set so it could log me in. So that's why I'm going to need to add on auth changed later to the login page. If you check out the chapters below, I'll show you exactly where that is if you want to skip to that for whatever reason. Cool, so you can see now that I'm clicking on this on add to do, it's opening the modal up, and if I enter in a to do and click OK, it logs it to the console. Obviously it's not saving at this point. If I click cancel, it'll just close it without doing any console logging because I haven't tried to add the to do. So now that that's working, I'm going to want to go and create my database. I'm just going to start in test mode, which basically allows writes within a certain time frame. You can actually configure those rules, and if you want to watch a tutorial on configuring rules, I don't have any currently, but you can go look at some other YouTube videos on configuring rules, or look up some blog articles, or even just read the Firebase documentation. So I'm creating a Firestore database, which is a NoSQL database, and it's got collections. Here's where you can edit the rules if you wanted to change your rules. It's got indexes if you had some complex queries, and it shows you your usage of the Firestore database. You get a certain amount for free. It's not like a greatly large amount, but I guess it's good enough to get going. Get some users and sort of build a proof of concept at the very least. If you want to pay, of course, you can always pay to increase your size availability. So basically this documentation will tell you a bit about how to structure your data, different capabilities that the Firestore database has. You can see how to add data, how to batch data, how to delete data. You can see how to do pretty much anything there is to do in Firestore. Get started is actually probably where you want to start. It shows you how to initialize your database. So this is actually Node.js. This isn't exactly the same as what I want to do. You can see that there's lots of different options like Kotlin, Swift, Java, but I'm actually using web version 9, so I'll go to that. And what I need to do is I need to import this get Firestore, and I'm just going to add that to my main Firebase file so that it can be accessed from anywhere. And then I'll create a variable db and export that. And I'll use get Firestore to get that db value. So using that db, I can then go on and add data and do anything else I want Firestore related. So now that we have our database, we can go ahead and add our code to add actual to-dos. So we're going to want to create a new function called add to-do, and we're going to pass in a to-do item, which is really just going to be a text string because when we're creating a to-do, we know we only really need one value for my simple to-do. We're going to want to import db from Firebase, and if we go to getting started, it shows you how to add a doc. So you'll need to import the collection and the add doc function from Firebase Firestore. So I'll just do that. And then you can call this function here called add doc to add the document, which will add to Firebase. You can specify what collection you want to add. So I'm going to add text will be the to-do item. Completed is always going to be false when I'm adding it. I'll also want to add the user ID, but I'll do that in a second. The reason I'm doing it separately is I actually want to show you that you can actually have different values in different documents, even if they're in the same collection. So we want to create my collection of to-dos and add the document to it. So for some reason my project stopped itself. I'm just restarting. And opening on iOS. Sometimes if you have quite a lot of issues with Expo, it's worth like completely closing the Expo app, maybe even deleting it and then reloading it if you can't get anything working with it, or even restarting the simulator. So adding my to-do, I'll specify my item, wash dishes, and click OK. I've console logged what my doc ref is. That's just got a little bit of information on it. It's probably a bit too much detail. There'll be information on who the authenticated user is and all that sort of thing. So if I go to the actual database now, you should be able to see my to-do item, but it's not linked to my user because I didn't specify the user ID when I was creating it. So I'm just going to specify that, and that's just going to allow me to, when I search for to-dos later, actually find the correct one for the user. So you can use auth.currentuser.uid, and that will add the user ID to the to-do item. So now if I go to that database, you can see I've got this extra field there, which is user ID, and I can delete that other document manually from within Firestore. But obviously you can also do it programmatically. I just wanted it deleted because I think it's bad data for my particular case. I don't want it sort of sitting there in the database forever. So what I'm also going to want to do is I'm wanting to load up the to-do list items for that specific user. So I'm going to use React State to control whether it's loading or not. And if it is, I'm going to show an activity indicator, which is basically like a little loading symbol. There are actually websites you can create your own custom loading symbols if you want. You can just Google free loading symbol and you can actually generate them, define the colors, choose from different options. So yeah, if you're interested in doing that, you can. And it's pretty simple. You just show your image basically on screen with a specific size. So when it's loading, I'll show the activity indicator, and once it's finished loading, I'll show the to-do list. So you can see that's now just constantly loading because it's never going to, I'm never setting is loading to false. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm wanting to load those to-do list items and then set is loading to false. So create a function to do that. So basically what I've done here is I'm going to create a query on the collections of to-dos, and once that's done, I'll set is loading to false. So I'm just going to go ahead and update this code that I've copied. I'm going to import query and where and get docs. So query on to-do collection, and I want to check where user ID is equal to the auth.currentuser.uid. And so that should load the correct documents. And then for each of those documents, I'm going to log out. I'm going to create a to-do list, which I'm going to add each to-do list item to. And then I'll just console log the to-dos just so you can see them. I won't set the to-dos just yet, but I will create a variable which will be my to-dos, and I'll start it as empty, and then once it's populated I can do set to-dos with the value from what I've gotten from my Firestore database. So I'll go and load from the database and set those to-dos. Now wanting to call load to-do list, I should actually have done this in react.useEffects, basically so it's done on component mount, but I didn't, so that's okay, that could be improved, and I suggest you improve that if you're using this code. But anyway, if it is loading, then I'll go load, otherwise I won't. The reason why I recommend using use effect is that when the component mounts, will call this, and basically it means that you won't need to have two variables, because I'm going to need another one later when I do my refresh control, purely because I didn't use effect. So I'm going to want to alter my to-do slightly. I want to make sure that's got the ID in it. So I'm going to create the to-do from the doc.data and then add the ID and then push that full to-do item into the to-dos list. That's just so that I've got the ID so I can do deletions and I can do other things like updating the specific to-do. So that's why I've wanted to do that. So now I'm just going to show you how to add on-off state changed, so that you can log back, you can automate logging in if the user was logged in a previous session. And it's just because it's starting to get annoying to me every time I log in. Every time I refresh, I need to basically enter something in the text input to trigger the change. So basically, if there's a user, then I'm going to navigate to to-do. So you can see it automatically goes along to to-do because it calls that on-off state change with the user. And then it loads my to-do items, and you can see that it's loaded the to-do items because it's console logging those out. I can remove that console log now that I know that it's loading the to-dos correctly. You can even see the ID in that second one. Oh yeah, you can see the ID in there. So I'm going to want to add my FlatList now, which will show my different to-do items. And to do that, I'm actually going to use this checkbox component. So it's not included by default. It's a community package, but it is quite a commonly used one. So React Native bouncy checkbox is what I'm going to be using, and it is quite a nice and simple, easy to implement checkbox that looks reasonably pretty, and you can click on the text as well as on the checkbox to actually check the item off, which is quite nice. So yeah, I'll just show you that. I've installed that now, and I'm just restarting my Expo app. And reopening it in iOS. So basically it gives you all the different properties that are available. Is checked as one that we're going to obviously be using, and then all these other ones will also be using. So it's got like fill color, unfill color, any icon styling you want, text styling. I'm going to leave it pretty simple. Oh yeah, and it gives you a on-press function, which will be useful if you are obviously wanting to do anything when the checklist item is pressed, which I think most people would. I'd be surprised if you had a checkbox that did nothing when you checked it. But anyway, I'll import that new component, which is bouncy checkbox, from its package, which is React Native bouncy checkbox once again. And then I want to create a render to do item function, which is basically going to take in the item and render it. And so basically I'll be passing this function to the FlatList so that for each data item that it has, it can render the individual to-do item. So for my to-do items, I'm going to want to render them in a row. So I'll use a view to wrap the items. I'm going to want the checklist with some text for the to-do item, and I'm going to also want the delete button available so that we can delete. If you're wanting more of that, like the classic slide to delete functionality, you can actually find a few tutorials on how to do that online. So I'll leave that to you. I'll probably do one at a later date, but for now I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not using TypeScript, so I'm just removing that type there. And I'm going to create a new function for when an item is checked. So I'll just call this check to do item and pass the item in and whether it's been checked or not. Then I'm going to want to return my FlatList from this show to do item, which will render my to-dos on screen. So the data I want to supply is the list of to-dos, which is set in my state. So if that changes, the FlatList will update. I want to use render item that I've created, the render to do item function, which will take an item and render it to a row. And I'm going to use this key extractor, which basically I think is used to sort of enhance performance a bit. So it knows what's been rendered on screen. And also, you know, when you're rendering lots of different items, then it's good to have a key. If you've ever used the map function, it'll warn you. So I need to import that FlatList. And I don't have that font family set up, so what I'm going to want to do is get rid of that. You can see that ticking and unticking works, but does absolutely nothing at this stage. So I'm just going to remove that font family because I don't have it installed. And now I'm going to want to include my inline text button, which is for delete. I don't want like a full-size button for this once again, just because I think it'd be a bit intrusive and it would sort of throw off the row container styling a bit. So yeah, that's what I want it to look like, but I want it to be more right aligned. I want that row to sort of take up that entire space, and that particular view with the delete button to be right aligned. So I'm just going to do some playing around with styling here just to sort of figure out what's going wrong where, and from there I can go ahead and I can style it correctly to how I want it to look. Like I said before, I find CSS sometimes you need to fiddle with it a bit to get it working well, especially when, like I said, I've got these overarching styles throughout my whole application. Just a quick note that the next 5 minutes is actually me debugging, trying to figure out how to lay out my component exactly how I want to do it. So I'll talk through it a bit, but it's probably reasonably boring. So if you want to skip to 1 hour 55 minutes, and then you'll be back in the main of the coding. I'm basically just applying background colours here and there. I've sped it up a bit so that it's faster if people want to actually watch it and see what I'm doing. But yeah, I'm just applying background colours so I can see where each component is actually taking up. I'm removing some styling to just sort of see whether it's coming from padding and stuff like that. But yeah, overall it's just a bit of trial and error, sort of seeing what's impacting it. Like I said earlier, it can be a little bit more complex to figure out your issues when you don't just have fresh styles for each individual component that you have, because you've got to figure out how they're all interacting together, which can be a bit of a pain at times. So yeah, there are benefits and drawbacks of separating code out into a styles file and folder. Maybe you just want to do particular things like text inputs or text styles, but containers and views are often can be a bit tricky to play around with. So yeah, there's just a little bit of a gotcha that you can sort of encounter with that. And I'll just let you watch and sort of see what I do. But really, I'm just sort of playing around, sort of trying to figure out where that value's coming from, and fix it up from there. Okay, so now that we have our component laid out exactly how we want it, we can continue with some more Firebase work. So when delete is pressed, I'm going to want to be able to delete my to-do item. So I'm going to create a function delete to do, and I'm going to pass the item ID, as that's how I'm going to refer to it and delete it. Then if I head over to the Firebase documentation, I can go to the delete data section and it will show me how to delete that individual document. So you're going to want to use and import that delete doc function. We've already imported docs. There's also ways you can delete specific fields if you want to, and delete entire collections. But I'm just going to want to delete a specific document for now. Later on I'll show you deleting multiple documents when I am deleting the user, because I want to delete any to-dos associated with them. The reason for that is just you don't want any data that's not necessary in your application. It means that you will end up paying additional money to Firebase. So that's why you want to make sure that you're using the minimum, what's minimum basically. So that's pretty simple. It's a pretty straightforward database call. And what I want to do after I've actually deleted that docs is I want to update that to-dos variable so that it's only showing to-dos that are actually existing in Firebase. I don't want to have any other ones. So I'm going to create a copy of that to-dos array, and then I'm going to filter out, I'm only going to want the items that weren't deleted. So basically I'll get the items where the ID is not equal to the to-do ID. And then I'll just set to-dos so that I'm updating my state and re-rendering everything to my updated to-do list. I'm going to need that to be asynchronous because I've got an await in there. So if I delete my to-do item, you can see it's gone off screen. And if I go over to my database, it shouldn't be in there anymore either. So you can see I've got a collection of to-dos, but there are no documents in there. So that's perfect. I've deleted my to-do item. If I refresh it, just so that you can see that it's definitely just not out of sync or anything like that, then you'll once again see that there is no to-do items. It actually does update itself if you make a change. It's quite responsive, so you don't actually need to refresh it, but I was just sort of showing you, if you're new to Firebase, that it has actually made that change. So now I'm going to update my add to do function, and I'm going to update that to show the to do that I've saved into the database. So to do that, I'm just going to extract out my object, and I'm going to set the ID after it's been saved, and then I'm going to get a copy of my to-dos array, and then I'm going to append that saved to do to the end of that. And then I'll set those to-dos so that it re-renders on the screen. So now when I add a to-do, it should automatically update the list that's been rendered and show my to-do. You can see that that's been updated and it's been added. And I can add additional ones, and it will just keep adding to the list. Cool, so I've got 2 items in that list now. Now I'm going to want to add a refresh control. So the refresh control is added so that I can refresh my to-do list. So if I had like a web front end, for example, and I made some edits there, then I'd still be able to pick up any changes by pulling down to refresh. Or another thing would be if you had a Facebook style newsfeed, you could pull down to refresh. So what you're going to want to do is set the refreshing property of the FlatList and an on refresh method, and that method's basically going to set as refreshing to true, which will show the spinner, and then it's also going to load any to-do items that you have. So if I had used the React's use effect hook, then I wouldn't have needed an additional is refreshing variable. I could have used is loading, but because I didn't, I need to use that is refreshing instead. So now I'm going to want to add my manage account screen, and this manage account screen is basically going to be able to do anything from logging out the user, deleting the user and any of the to-dos associated with them, and also change the user's password. So I'm going to import button and view because I'm going to need some buttons here, and I'm also going to import React because I'm going to use React state. And of course, I'm going to use my styles that I've been using for my whole application. I'm also going to need navigation because I'm going to want to navigate away from this page when the user logs out or deletes their account. So this is the main container for the page, and it's just basically going to show all the different actions that are available to the user inside it. So I've got a back to to-dos button, which will basically take the user back to to-dos if there's nothing they actually want to do. So it's just going to do a navigation pop. I'm also going to add my new screen in there. So it's going to be manage account route and use the manage account component. It's imported that because I've selected it from the list. And once again, I'm not showing a header because I'm just going to have my own sort of styling going on. I don't really want the header there. And when the user presses on the manage account button, it'll navigate them to the manage account page. Okay, I'm thinking something's probably not reloaded, so I'm just going to give that a reload. Definitely got manage accounts specified correctly. Just fix that indentation. So yeah, I'm just going to reload just because I think that this is probably not a real error. I think it's probably just never reloaded when I added my route. Yeah, so if I click on manage account, it takes me to the manage account page, and if I click on back to to-dos, it takes me back to the to-dos. Now I'm going to take my logout out of my to-do page because it's going to be inside the manage account. So I'm just going to copy that in there, and I'm going to take that off section, and I'm also going to remove that sign out option from the to-dos. Then I'm going to want to add a button that can log out. Obviously, you may notice I've actually stopped using the same colouring as what I've used throughout the application. So that's somewhere where I could have improved. I could have probably either extracted that to a component so it was easy to use the same colours throughout, or I could have, what I also alternatively could have done would just be update this colours, obviously. So I'm going to want to be able to set a new password. So I'm going to create input for those, and also I need to use React State to provide the backing for that. I'm also going to have delete user, so I'll import update password and delete user. So here's my button that will update password, and on press I'm going to update password. I'm going to create a function for that in just a second. So I'm calling it update user password. That's just so it doesn't clash with the update password that I've imported. And when I click on that, what I'm going to want to do is I'm just going to copy across an input, update the user's password to whatever's been input into this box here. So I'll call it new password, and I'll use those new password and set new password functions. And if I copy across this code here, this will allow me to update the password. So once the password's updated, I want to clear out that password, so that's why I'm setting new password to empty. And if there's an error, then I'm going to want to handle it. So I'm going to set up a new variable for error message. So I'll set the error message to the error.message so it displays on the screen and the user knows what's gone wrong. I'll also clear that error message if the user manages to successfully update their password. And now here's a text component which will display the error message. So you can now see I've got a new input where I can type in a new password and click update password. I want this to be a secure text entry because it's a password. And when I click update password, okay. So I actually need to go auth.currentUser. Okay, so I need to set a stronger password. So if I go ahead and do that, it says auth requires recent login. So I haven't logged in recently enough. So how you can solve that is you can actually provide a field for them to provide their current password and use that to log in. And then from there you can go ahead and do the update. So you're going to need another text input for that, and you're also going to want to clear it out once the password's successfully updated. So I'm just going to copy this text input, put it above it, and it's just going to be the current password, and I'll update the value and the on change text function. So yeah, I'm just grabbing sign in with email address and password, and that's what I'm going to use so that the user can then go ahead and update their password. So I'll call that first, and if that's successful, then I will allow the user to update their password. I don't need to enter the email address because I can get that from the current user. If there's an error on logging in, I'm also going to want to set that error message. I can copy that code into this code here when the user's successfully logged in. So first it tries to log me in, it says wrong password because I've entered the wrong password. But if I try to update password after entering the correct, it just clears everything out and looks like it's worked. So now I'm wanting to add the option to delete the user. So once again, I'm going to want a new function for deleting the user. So basically this time, if there's no password, I'll give this error must enter current password. I mean, I probably should have given that error also for update password, but oh well. And then I'm going to sign in, because this delete also requires you to sign in. And then I'm going to delete the user. And when the user's deleted successfully, I'm going to want to pop to top, which will take me back to the login page because there's no longer a user. And I'm going to want to set the error message if there's any error messages with deleting the user. Another thing that I'm wanting to do is I'm going to want to delete any to-dos associated with that user. The reason I want to do that is that I don't want to have the costs of storing any additional data that's not going to be utilised. So if users keep deleting their accounts, but there's still to-dos tied to that user, then I'm just going to have all this dead data sitting around that's not going to be used for anything. So you can delete it specifically by the to-do ID, which would mean you'd need to load all the to-dos and then delete them all individually. Or you can batch this process up a bit more. So you can actually do some batch deletions, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So you're still going to want to load the to-dos. So you'll use that same query that you've used on your to-dos page, and basically you're wanting to get the user's to-dos. But you're wanting to take this a step further, and you're going to want to, instead of adding them to array, you're going to want to batch deletions for them all. I'm just copying across the Firebase stuff so that I can get all the references I need. Going to go ahead and delete and add a few that I need and delete some that aren't necessary. So first off, you're going to want to create a batch, which is a batch of all your different write commands that you want to make, and you want to pass that db to it. And then you're going to call batch.delete, which will basically add a delete to the batch. And then once you've finished adding all your changes to the batch, you're going to want to call commit, and that will go ahead and make all those changes to the database in bulk. And it'll be a bit more performant that way and require less interactions with the database. Looks like my app's stopped again, so I'll just start that up again. And open it on iOS. So I've got this little error here that says unexpected reserved word await. I'm just going to change to using handling the promise, just see if that helps out there. I find it tends to generally work a bit better, so I'm just going to do that here and move all my other logic inside the handled promise. So now I can reload. It seems to be working a bit better. It's not giving me an error anymore. I can log on in. I've got my to-do there. I can add one if I want, just to show that it can delete multiple to-dos. I'll go show you that it's all there in the Firestore database. So now I'm going to go manage my account and try and delete it. Just sort of showing you me stepping through here because I was noticing that there were actually a few issues. So I just want to sort of figure out what's going wrong and batching that delete. For some reason it's not hitting there. Okay, try again. Okay, so it's giving me an error now on batching delete, I believe. If I look at the error, it says provided document reference is from a different Firestore instance. So I went away and did some research on this, and it's actually because the query snapshot gives you documents. It doesn't actually give you a document reference, so you actually need to specifically go doc.ref. So I'm changing that to a doc because it's a doc, and then you can actually get the reference like so, and from there you can actually go ahead and delete it. So it was just a little mistake I made, not being overly familiar with Firebase. So if I continue now, it should get to the commit. I'm not sure what happened. It might just be because I hit delete user before I actually let my code finish. Cool, doc.ref is a thing, so that's not causing any issues anymore. You can sort of see that it's continuously saying unhandled promise, unhandled promise, unhandled promise, which kind of indicates it's looping, and then it says it's exceeded the quota for verifying passwords, which is a bit odd. So I'm going to have to try and use a different user to resolve this because obviously that user has run out of quota for however long it takes. So I'm going to want to add some to-dos here. Cool, you can see those have been added in. And you can see my other to-dos have actually been deleted, so it's successfully deleting. It's just not actually deleting the account for some reason. If you saw when I went to authentication, the user I was using before, the account still existed. Now I'm going to try and delete that user. And you can see it's hitting batch.commit multiple times. It shouldn't really be doing that. And you can see that possible unhandled promise exceptions just continually going up, which kind of indicates that it's sort of getting called again and again. So I'm just going to stop that just so it stops. And I think what the issue is here is I've actually called my delete user function delete user, which aligns with the Firebase name. So you actually need to make sure you're naming your function differently, obviously. Otherwise, it's going to be used instead of your imported delete user function, and that's why it wasn't deleting my user. So I'm going to go add some more to-dos just to show that it can delete the to-dos and the user account, because previously it's just been deleting to-dos purely because my to-dos did not align with my, because my function names were sort of interfering with each other. And now if I click delete user, you can see that's logged me out. And that's because it's also cleared it from the authentication users, like it's fully deleted it. You can see that there's actually still the username and password that I logged in with initially set against the login page. So basically when I sign in, I want to clear out any error messages, emails or passwords so that I don't have them showing up when I either log out or when I delete my user account. So that's all I've got for today. All my code is on GitHub and you can take a look at it in your own time. I hope this has been helpful to you, and if you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe for more content.